All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome again. This is the California Fire Safe Council's 2023-2024 State Fire Capacity Grant Application Training. This grant program and publication are funded in full by the U.S. Forest Service, Pacific Southwest Region, under the terms of two grant numbers 22 DG 1105 2012-141 and 23 DG 1105 2012-164. The opinions expressed are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. Forest Service. So today's training is presented by myself, Morgan Galliano, and Thomas Schumacher. We are both members of the California Fire Safe Council's Grants Clearinghouse team. So we've had a lot of people register for this training so far. We haven't exceeded our maximum allowed attendance. We're glad to see so many people are interested in finding out about this program. I wanted to let you know up front, since we do have so many participants, we're going to ask you to email your questions, write them down, save them, and send them to me. We'll have the contact information again at the end of the presentation, and we'll also send it out in a follow-up email so you'll know how to reach out to us and ask any questions that you have. I think it might be a little bit difficult or overwhelming to try and respond to questions in the chat since we just have so many people. So thank you for understanding. And again, just want to note my email is lgalliano, although I go by Morgan, it's not an M in the email. So just want to make sure nobody gets confused with that. If you're trying to reach out to me. We'll also post the recording of this training on the website, and so you'll be able to access that later if there's any information you want to go back and review. So the next few slides, we'll have some additional California Fire Safe Council contacts. These are the administrative contacts for the organization. Our executive directors, J.C. Hyde, business and operations officers, Lori Vance, and our executive assistant is Felicia Dunn. We also have members of the California Fire Safe Council programs and outreach team with us. They're on the call today, and if you have any questions for them, you're also welcome to reach out to them. Brittany Munoz is our Southern California Regional Coordinator, and Brooke McAllister is our Central and Interim Northern Regional Coordinator. And then Becca Joyner is the programs team lead. Brittany and Brooke are available to connect local organizations with resources and information, and they coordinate monthly meetings for local fire prevention organizations to share resources and updates or hear presentations from guest speakers. You can find dates and registration links for those meetings on the events calendar in the media tab on the California Fire Safe Council website. The next meeting will be, I believe, the Southern California Region meeting on February 10th from 12 to 1 p.m. But you can get all those meeting dates and registration info on the calendar. If you want to get in touch with our programs and outreach team, their contact information is included here on the next slide. In addition to our program staff, we also have Jessica Martinez, who is our program director, listed here, and Megan Kadich is our communications and outreach specialist. Laura Papiak is also works for communications and outreach, and she's currently on leave, so it's best to reach out to Megan if you have questions about social media related topics. Here are the contacts for our additional grant team members. If you have grants through other programs that we're passing through, you may also have contact with the other grant staff. For the 23-24 SFC program, again, I will be your main contact for any questions going forward. All right, now that we've reached the agenda, I will hand things over to Thomas Schumacher to share the grant program topics that we will cover today.
Thank you very much, Morgan. I appreciate that, and welcome to everyone to this presentation. We're going to be going over the agenda. Just a brief note, if I have to take a sip of water, I've had bronchitis for the past 3 weeks, and sometimes the cough kicks in when I least expect it or need it. So just a brief note if that in fact happens. In terms of our agenda, we will be covering CA Fire Safe Council contacts, which we have done, CFSC and the Grants Clearinghouse, the 23-24 SFC program overview, some federal grants basics, the question of environmental compliance, grant life cycle phases, at which point we will also have a break. In section 2, which will be presented by my colleague Morgan, we will be going over writing the application, the requirements for submitting the application, as well as the selection and award process. Next slide, please. In terms of the Grants Clearinghouse, the California Fire Safe Council was created by the California Fire Alliance and CFSC working in cooperation. It is currently operated by CFSC, and you can see our website there, www.cafiresafecouncil.org. We've had a number of agencies that have traditionally funded CFSC, as well as the Grants Clearinghouse in specific. Those include the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the State Farm Insurance Company that you may be familiar with. Next slide, please. CFSC has had 20 years of impact, and as you can see in the chart right here, CFSC has done a number of important things, including administering $125 million in funding, 1,211 projects completed in 383 communities, 540,000 acres treated, 3,400 prevention plans, 10,000 education programs, and 2,500 workshops, all summed up in our motto of inform, empower, and mobilize. Next slide, please. The U.S. Forest Service has created the State Fire Capacity Program. This was formerly known as the State Fire Assistance Program, and its goal is to assist people and communities to moderate the threat of catastrophic fire. This is to be done through several means: fuel hazard mitigation on non-federal land, community hazard mitigation and planning, and prevention and mitigation education, all three. Next slide, please. From the California Fire Safe Council website, you can see right there, again, www.cafiresafecouncil.org. You will find a number of resources available for you. You can access the grant application resources there in the Grants and Programs tab /Grants Program. And there you will find the grant application guide, the application planning tool, and the training recording, this recording, in other words, that will be coming very soon. You can also access the online Zoom Grants application through our website under the Grants and Programs tab /Apply for a Grant. Next slide, please. A number of important dates to highlight and put on your calendar right away to make sure they're firmly in your mind. The grant application period opened on February 1st of 2024. The training workshops will be held today, of course, as well as the 12th of February, 2024. And again, it will be available online in recorded format. These applications will be due online March 15th, 2024 by 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. So once again, all applications due March 15th, 2024 by 11:59 Pacific time, p.m. Preliminary award announcements will be made in June of 2024. The precise date still to be determined, but again, the award announcements in June of 2024. Next slide, please. These grants, of course, are federally funded, and that brings up some serious consequences in terms of working with federal grant funds. These include a successful grant application. A successful application is more than just a good project proposal, and implementing a project with federal grant funds requires a significant amount of reporting, flexibility, and communication. Federal grants are subject to the applicable federal rules and regulations, specifically those in 2 CFR 200, and the terms and conditions of the program. This workshop is designed to assist you in how to write a competitive application while also addressing all the requirements of the grant program. CFSC wants you to be prepared to receive and manage a federal grant correctly. Next slide, please. Some specifics related to the State Fire Capacity Program. There is $1,575,000 in state fire capacity grant funding for wildfire prevention projects available. It's available for California and the Tahoe Basin region of Nevada. The grant term is 24 months or 2 years. And in terms of the match requirement, it is dollar for dollar, one for one, in other words, and this can be cash or in kind. We'll circle back to this in a moment. In terms of the application limits, each request has an absolute maximum request limit of $100,000. Each applicant can submit one application. There we go. I think we lost the slide there.
Sorry.
No problem. You could just pop back to that one. There we are. That's it. Thanks so much. There's one application per applicant. However, fiscal sponsors may submit 2 applications and receive up to $100,000 plus manage up to $100,000 for one other organization. Now, with this information in mind, to return very briefly to the question of match requirements. If you request the maximum of $100,000, then your organization must pledge to match that with $100,000 as well. That's what we mean by 1-to-1 ratio. Now, next slide, please. There are a number of types of projects that are eligible for this funding. One kind is prevention, education, and outreach. Some examples of this include defensible space education, door-to-door community outreach, creating or disseminating outreach products such as pamphlets, posters, mailings, billboards, videos, and the like. Also, hosting educational workshops and training. A note, it's a good idea to include some funds in your budget for advertising and for refreshments. Please keep that in mind as you plan. Next slide, please. Another category is community hazard mitigation and planning. Some examples of this include developing a community wildfire protection plan, CWPP, or equivalent sort of plan that focuses on communities at risk or at-risk communities adjacent to federal land and incorporating federal projects. Also, conducting community risk or hazard assessments, including those needed for the FireWise community program. Next slide, please. A third type of project available is the fuel hazard mitigation. Some examples of this include chipper programs that are community-wide or provide curbside services. Also, community protection fuel breaks and vegetation thinning projects. Fuel reductions, delivering biomass to markets. Grazing or herbicide application. Maintenance of previous fuel reduction projects. And prescribed or cultural or good fire burns not allowed under the terms of this particular grant. So once again, prescribed burns are not being allowed under this particular program. Next slide, please. Eligibility, an important question for your organization to ask as you move forward, is to determine whether or not it is eligible for these particular grants. The projects, firstly, must be in California or the Tahoe Basin region of Nevada. Individuals are not eligible to apply. There are, however, a wide diversity of organizations that are eligible for applications, including nonprofits, HOAs, POAs, Native American tribes, resource conservation districts, towns and cities, institutions of higher learning, for-profit companies, special districts, school districts, counties, and even state agencies. Again, individuals are not eligible to apply. Next slide, please. As you move forward with your application, please ask yourself the question if your organization needs a fiscal sponsor. A fiscal sponsor acts on behalf of an applicant organization that is not incorporated or does not have the organizational capacity to receive federal grant funds. The fiscal sponsor assumes legal responsibility for the management of grant funds, for signing the subaward agreement and receiving the funds, as well as providing full accounting services. The fiscal sponsor would then prepare all reports, manage the project, deal with bid solicitation and contracting, as well as processing invoices or work orders related to the project. Next slide, please. This slide gives you an idea of where your organization fits into the grand scheme of things. The funding comes firstly from the federal government, either Congress, the president, or a department or agency. Then those funds are granted to a recipient, specifically a pass-through organization. CFSC is a good example of this. CFSC is a grantee and receives federal funding as a pass-through organization. The funds then are passed through to the subrecipients. That would be your organization should it be awarded, or a fiscal sponsor. The beneficiaries are members of the public and specific groups that are supported by the grant activities. Next slide, please. There is a specific role for the subrecipient. The first role is project implementation. This means accomplishing the specific grant objectives. Also, implementing the project as approved. This also includes working with contractors, vendors, and the like. Crucially, it includes monitoring and tracking of all accomplishments and progress, as well as before and after photos, a very important aspect of the work. Next slide, please. Proper grant management for awarded projects does include a good deal of work for your organization. This includes following all grant requirements, providing accurate, complete, and timely reports.
Come on.
Meeting all deadlines. And again, crucially, document. This includes documenting both the expense and the match. Please keep in mind that you need to keep complete accounting records until notified from CFSC, which is usually 3 years after the master grant closeout. Next slide, please. Before applying for a grant, you should ask yourself or your organization these important questions. Firstly, does your organization have the capacity to manage the project and the grant funds in accordance with federal regulations? Does your financial management system meet federal requirements? Do you have the necessary project management and technical expertise, or conversely, can you get it? Have you successfully completed similar work in the past? Do you need a fiscal sponsor? And lastly, can you handle the added workload given your current organizational structures? Next slide, please. Federal grant funds may only be used in accordance with the Code of Federal Regulations, 2 CFR 200. These are produced by the Office of Management and Budget and the policies that they promulgate. The regulations provide detailed guidance on how you must manage your grant funds and project activities. There are consequences for not complying with the federal regulations, including repayment of the grant funds. The link at the bottom of this slide provides you with a specific link to the 2 CFR 200 document that will give you an idea of the regulations that your organization will need to follow should it be awarded. Next slide, please. Your organization must have clear written policies that deal with a number of different categories, including finance and accounting. In other words, you must protect the grant funds, determine allowability, and maintain accurate documentation. You must have written policies dealing with personnel as well. That is, proper time management and effort reporting for employees as well as volunteers. This tracking must be consistent and present allowable charges only. You must have procurement and purchasing policies. This includes the solicitation of services and goods, and crucially must avoid unnecessary purchasing. All costs, of course, must be allowable and in line with 2 CFR 200. The written policies need to include property management. This provides safeguards for equipment and also provide detailed instructions on how to acquire or dispose of property. Because travel is also a key part of many projects, your written policies must deal with how travel will be reimbursed, approved, and how mileage also will be provided for. Lastly, your written policies need to include conflict of interest statements. This provides a procedure for handling conflicts as well as addressing the board and the staff of your organization. Next slide, please. Certain parties who are debarred, suspended, or otherwise excluded may not be participants or principals in federal assistance awards and subawards, and in certain contracts under those awards and subawards as well. We urge you very strongly, in no uncertain terms, to check your own organization and contractors to make sure that no one is debarred or suspended. You can search for these specific records at https://www.sam.gov. SAM stands for System of Award Management. So sam.gov, this is where you can go to search these records. Next slide, please. As you move forward with your grant application, keep cost principles firmly in mind. All grant-funded costs must be allowable, allocable, reasonable, necessary, and verifiable. More on that will come as we move through the next slides. Next slide, please. An example of a cost principle can be found here. Compensation for personnel services is allowable, as one example, if it is reasonable for the services rendered, if it conforms to the established policy of the organization or agency and is consistently applied to both federal and non-federal activities. Also, it is allowable if it is determined by and supported with clear documentation as provided by the applicable cost principles. Keep in mind, documentation for these costs must meet the federal standards of 2 CFR 200, which may be different from timekeeping and activity tracking procedures of your organization. Next slide, please. Grant funds are provided to the California Fire Safe Council via a master grant from a funding agency. We've covered this before. Matching contributions are cash or in-kind goods or services that come from non-federal sources. Next slide, please. We're going to discuss matching contributions a little bit more closely right now. All matching contributions must meet all of the following criteria in order to be accepted. They must be verifiable from the recipient's records, specifically the financial records. They are acceptable if they are not included as contributions for any other federally assisted project or program. They must be necessary and also reasonable for proper and efficient accomplishment of project or program objectives and allocable under 2 CFR 200. They're acceptable also if they are allowable under applicable cost principles in 2 CFR 200, subpart E. Now, you can see in the parenthetical marks there the specific sections that deal with this particular question. It is 2 CFR 200.402 through 411. So please copy that down and make sure you have record of that so you can check as you move forward. Lastly, matching contributions are acceptable if they are not paid by the federal government under another award. Next slide, please. As we discussed in the agenda, one of the issues that we will bring to your attention, because it is so important, is the question of federal environmental compliance requirements. There are several that you need to take into consideration as you move forward with a grant application. All projects must be reviewed for compliance with the following federal environmental regulations. These include the Endangered Species Act, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, as well as the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act. CFSC uses a registered professional forester as a contractor for this part of the federal review. If funded, you may be contacted directly by our contracted registered professional forester to undertake this important evaluation. Next slide, please. Keep in mind as you consider the environmental question that state and/or local environmental regulations may also apply. Some examples of this include the California Environmental Quality Act, colloquially known as CEQA, the California Endangered Species Act, the local tree ordinances that may be in place in your area, as well as air quality or smoke and burn permit requirements that may be in place. Next slide, please. We urge you on the basis of these environmental considerations, both federal, state, and local, to consider consulting with a registered professional forester. Registered professional foresters oftentimes provide management of forested landscapes. They are licensed by the state of California, and their involvement is required when managing forested landscapes. They can help you with a number of items, including prescriptions for treatment, sale of forest products, the environmental surveys that we've just gone through, as well as site considerations like water quality and soil protection. So again, strongly consider consulting with a registered professional forester as you move forward with your application. In terms of fuel treatment projects and their environmental considerations, do keep in mind the question of aesthetics, how it will look, in other words, what the appearance will be, air quality, biological resources, and the time of year that you're planning to do the work, any cultural resources, as well as geology and soil considerations, hazards and hazardous materials that may be encountered or produced by the work, water quality, noise, and lastly, the maintenance type and interval. In other words, how will you maintain the work that has been done? These are all important questions to keep in mind. Approved grant-funded work or match cannot begin until your organization has received clearance in terms of the environmental compliance process. Again, until this is completed, no work can begin. Funds may be requested for environmental surveys and other non-vegetation treatment activities, but only for those before the environmental process is completed. The project areas may include species, habitats, cultural resources, or historical sites that require special protection. Record searches or surveys may be required prior to the project implementation. And lastly, remember to include any potential costs for these processes in your application budget. Your grant has a very specific and detailed life cycle. You are right now at the top in the orange colored box, the application phase. That is followed by the pre-award phase, the awards, the post-award, monitoring, and then finally closeout. Again, this particular type of grant is a 24-month program, so this is stretched out over 2 years. The application phase, where you are right now, includes several facets. For one, preparation. This includes attending grant application workshops like this one. It includes evaluating organizational capacity, your policies and procedures, your financial and business systems, as well as planning the whole project and the budget. Following that, it includes the second major facet, which is submission. You complete the application package, the application form, provide letters of commitment, a fiscal sponsor agreement if that is applicable, maps, the federal indirect cost rate, that has been approved, if that is applicable as well. And lastly, be sure to submit by the deadline. Again, that's March 15th, 2024 by 11:59 p.m. In the application phase, there will be a very clear risk assessment procedure. This includes completing the pre-award report, submitting all required documents and maps, undergoing organizational capacity risk assessment, that will be done by CFSC, and completing revised forms to the application if necessary. Once these are completed, then you will be asked to review and sign the subaward agreement. In the pre-award phase, you will undergo a project review. This includes an initial screening for completeness to make sure that all the I's have been dotted and T's crossed. It will include independent review committee scoring and recommendations to the CFSC board for funding. CFSC will review and the board will ratify a list of projects approved for funding. In the post-award phase, if your project is approved, the next step is the implementation of the work as agreed. This will include the environmental compliance review. Completing that is crucial. The selection of contractors, vendors, and the like. Complete all of the tasks that are connected to the work. Monitor and track the accomplishments and progress of the work, and providing before, during, and after photographs. This phase will also include a grant specialist site visit in which one of our staff comes to see the work that you're doing, as well as reviewing your business procedures in your offices as well. The post-award phase also includes, again, the crucial grant management that will make your project successful. We have some tips that might help you as you move forward for this phase. This includes requesting and receiving grant payments. Keep in mind that the U.S. Forest Service sometimes can take a bit of time before these payment requests are fulfilled. So we usually request that you submit these payment requests frequently and often to make sure the costs are covered. Submit completed quarterly reports on time. If reports are not submitted on time, it may impact your ability to request funds. Progress reports and match and expense reports must be included, signed, and accurate. In other words, they must tally with what is reported in Zoom grants as well. Be sure to track all expenditures and match contributions carefully. Renew annually your organizational information. Things like your general liability insurance, the UEI number, and SAM registration. As we've mentioned several times before, document everything. We emphasize this 3 times. Document, document, document. Make sure it's all retained. And maintain an organized, easy to follow grant file. For the closeout phase, several things will take place here as well. You will complete the final progress report. You will also complete a closeout report and submit all required documentation. Any unspent funds that you might have will be returned to CFSC as well as excess interest. You will also provide us with success stories and a confidential questionnaire. Awarded projects must retain the grant file until 3 years after CFSC's master grant closes. Before you apply, please keep in mind, there are many rules and regulations that govern the use of federal grant funds. Your agency will have to abide by all of the applicable grant funds and the regulations if your agency accepts those funds. It is your agency's responsibility in no uncertain terms to review and abide by all of the regulations governing the grant. At this point, we will be taking a break. I believe that is 15 minutes. Morgan, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think 15 minutes is the limit. So I will be turning the floor back over to my colleague.
Thanks, Thomas. It seems like we're making pretty good time, and I think people are probably good with just a 5-minute break. So, if you need to run to the bathroom or grab a cup of tea or anything, we'll just start back up in 5 minutes, and we'll go over the application process in Zoom Grants at that point. Thank you. Okay, hello everyone. We'll go ahead and start back in looking at the application this time. So we'll go through the application topics, the review process, and revisit the resources that you can use to help you complete the application. We're going to go through a little overview of the Zoom Grants platform, the sections of the application that you will be completing, a little overview of the review process that should help you think toward how your application is scored, and then the resources that you'll use to complete your application. So it's important to know that CFSC can't change the account contact information or passwords for your account when you set it up in Zoom Grants. So if you need assistance sort of getting initially into Zoom Grants, we can guide you through setting up an account. But if you have an existing account that you want to use, but maybe it's under someone else's name, or it's an account that you used several years ago, you may end up needing to contact Zoom Grants, and we can help you do that to restore or change your account information. So to create your Zoom Grants account or to start an application, you will go to the CFSC website first. That's the easiest place to start this process from. We have a Zoom Grants portal embedded in the CFSC website, and you can either access an existing account from there or start a new account in that location. We request that if you are a fiscal sponsor organization applying on behalf of another organization, that you be the account holder in Zoom Grants. For the implementation of the grants, it works better if the fiscal sponsor organization, since they are officially receiving the grant, that they are the account holder. So something to note in Zoom Grants is that there's a link on the far right. Once you're in the site, there's a link titled Find a Grant Writer. This will take you to a site outside of California Fire Safe Council's program. It's hosted by Zoom Grants, but it's, again, not part of our grant program. It's for assistance with the grant writing process, but it's not affiliated with CFSC, and it's like a platform for actually hiring contracted grant writers. So you may see that in Zoom Grants, and just didn't want you to be confused by what that is. To start a new application in Zoom Grants, you can select the Open Programs tab, and you'll see the State Fire Capacity Program there. And that is how you can access a new application from within Zoom Grants. So this is just a view of what the homepage looks like in Zoom Grants. You'll have basically two tabs in the brown section at the top, your account profile information, which you'll need to complete, and then your account home, where you can view your applications and you can start a new application. So below that, once you select a specific application to apply for or a program to apply for, you will have these 5 application tabs. These are all part of the application, so make sure that you go in and take a look at all 5 so you know what to expect, what information you're going to need to be gathering. You don't necessarily have to start with the first. I think you do have to actually fill out the organization information to move forward in the application. So if you jump ahead and it's not letting you submit things, use that tab first. But be sure to complete all 5 tabs. On this program application page, you'll also see the library, which contains useful documents about things like how to calculate biomass, the cohesive strategy, background information, and we'll also post the slides from this webinar there. So those first 3 tabs are sort of the narrative questions and short answer questions that are part of the application. You're entering your organization information, and then program information and narratives about your project. And then the last 2 tabs are the tables, including the budget, work plan, the project deliverables tables, and your match information. And then the final tab is the documents tab, where you'll upload any required documents that apply to your organization. If you have questions about what documents apply, don't hesitate to reach out. There's a lot to this application. It's fairly long. There are a lot of questions. And we encourage you to reach out because we want to make sure that you are able to answer all the questions as accurately as possible. So here is a view of what the application contacts page will look like. Again, if you're applying through a fiscal sponsor, please use their account and set it up that way. If you've applied to the Grants Clearinghouse before, some of this information will be automatically filled. If you changed it for this application, it will change for all applications under the account. So you may need to create a new account if you have different folks managing a project than you have in the past, or if you have current grants where you don't want your current contact information applied. So reach out to us if you need help understanding how to set that up. You have the option in Zoom Grants to add collaborators to your account just to a specific application. So you can manage things that way. If you're a fiscal sponsor and you need to add your sponsored organization, or you want additional people to have access to sections of the application, you can add them as collaborators moving forward. I don't believe collaborators have the ability to submit the grant, so just keep that in mind. Once you're ready to submit it, the account holder themselves will have to do that part. It will be particularly beneficial for your organization, for your application, if you communicate how your organization has a plan to make sure all the roles and responsibilities for managing the project are covered, that you have the capacity to complete reports on time, and that project managers are aware of the reporting requirements and deadlines. That's why we go into so much detail at the front. Federal grants, require a lot of detailed reporting, and we want to make sure that everybody kind of knows what they're getting into when they apply for these funds. There is a lot of work involved on the back end in terms of reporting and making sure all the numbers are consistent with the application budget and so forth. So communicating the ability to implement the grant is a very important part of demonstrating your organization capacity. The project information tab is where you'll find sort of the bulk of the narrative questions and project information. I think there are about 48 questions on there, so just pace yourself. A lot of them are, short answers, just kind of grabbing information here and there that you need to fill in. If you are completing a fuels project, there will be additional fuels questions in a section that opens up for you to complete, and then just make sure that your project you're describing is consistent with your work plan steps and your budget. It's a long application. It's kind of easy to get lost in certain sections, but if you kind of take the approach of being concise, describing your project in few enough steps that you can sort of describe it start to finish fairly easily, but also providing enough detail so that it's clear what you're doing start to finish. So it's kind of a balancing act. Some of the questions in tab 3 will relate to public engagement and sustainability of your project. These are important because we don't just want you to, receive a grant and complete a project. We want to make sure that the impacts of that project are going to be ongoing, that you're getting as much kind of bang for your buck in terms of making the community aware of what you're doing and communicating the importance of fire mitigation, so that you're not just having the impact within the project footprint, but within the community, and hopefully pushing mitigation efforts forward beyond your project. So several of the items that we track with the federal grants relate to looking at which communities have been impacted by the project deliverables. Are there any fire-wise communities impacted? Tracking what political boundaries are within your project, and also what jobs you are supporting or creating with your project. A note about the communities at risk list. Communities at risk is an official designation made by CAL FIRE. So many of the areas you're working in obviously would be considered at risk, but in this case, there's an official sort of definition of that term. The communities at risk list can be found by following the application support link, which is in the application. You'll find it under several of the questions. It's basically a collection of tabs that have information, background information relating to the questions you're going to be answering. One of the specific application questions relates to how your project aligns with the National Cohesive Strategy. This program is provided in support of the Cohesive Strategy objectives and its 3 focus areas. So you want to think about how your project relates to those topics of restoring and maintaining resilient landscapes, supporting fire-adapted communities, and supporting safe, effective, risk-based wildfire response. So most of these projects support those 3 goals just by default in some way, but we want you to kind of think about and communicate how you're doing that. So this cute flower graphic illustrates many examples of how your programs can support the development of fire-adapted communities. If you need a little more sort of guidance in how to think about that, or maybe areas where you want to emphasize the impacts of your project. The fire hazard severity zone and fire regime information for the application can be found by following the support link, again, that is in the application, and then using the tabs to find this information, background information. If you're not familiar with the concepts, if this is like the first time you've applied for funding, maybe you haven't looked at these websites in the past, you're not quite sure what you're looking at, feel free to reach out. We're happy to help you understand what you're seeing and what you're working on. California Fire Safe Council also uses a GIS survey site for this application process to gather the project center locations. At this stage, we're not looking for boundaries. We're not looking for polygons. We're just looking for, where's your project located so we can cite it on the map and see how all the applications are distributed throughout the state. There's a link in the application that you'll just follow. It's a fairly simple process of entering the center of your project. This one happens to be in the middle of Lake Tahoe, just for illustration purposes. So you'll enter your site, just put your pin on the map. The site also displays your latitude and longitude where you put your pin, and that's one of the questions further up in the application. So if you need to get the latitude and longitude, you can follow this link and you can grab that right here. We recommend that if you have a large, like say a planning project, just pick a central location that best represents it, or some people put the location of their office. Just a general location is fine. For field treatment projects, try to zoom into the project center. If you actually have a treatment footprint, you can zoom in to that location. That'd be great. So for the fuel treatment section of the application, these questions are useful in understanding how the project will influence the habitat in the project area. This information is used by the review committee to understand the project treatment types, and it's also used by the environmental reviewers should your project be selected for funding. So we want you to describe the site, native or exotic species that are dominating the site, the planned vegetation treatment. Obviously, consider things like habitat, the types of fuels that are there, access to the site, and then for the post-treatment site, describe kind of the desired conditions that will result. You'll also describe any biomass products generated by the fuel reduction. Those can sometimes be sold to offset some of the project cost. Examples are firewood, saw logs, posts, poles, fuel wood for power generation, possibly. There's increasing interest from the funding agencies in biomass utilization and looking for those opportunities. So it's important to capture any relevant information about that. However, if your project doesn't specifically use the biomass that's generated from thinning or chipping, that's not uncommon. Haul costs are high, especially in rural areas. It may just not be practical to use biomass, and you're not penalized for generating biomass that's not used. Continuing in the fuels treatment section, we will ask for the number of fuels treatment projects. This definition is a little bit up to you. Most projects people consider just one large project, and that's totally fine. If maybe you're working in two separate communities and you kind of define those as two separate projects, but they're funded under one grant, you may answer two. If you're, creating, let's say, 5 Firewise communities, it might make more sense to communicate that as 5 separate projects. It just really depends on how you define things and how you're organizing your project. And then we ask for the total acreage of the project area just to get an idea of what the actual treatment footprint is going to be. It helps in kind of determining what the cost is related to what's getting treated. When you're entering the total acreage of the project area, it is really just the footprint. So these questions about the number of homes treated, these are relatively new. I think we just added them in this funding cycle. We used to ask about these deliverables quite 7 or 8 years ago, and we've kind of brought them back. These numbers can be a little hard to project up front because you may not know how much participation you're going to have. So just give your best projection as to how many homes you think your project will be treating, and the estimated cost of treatment per home. We're trying to get an idea of, what fire mitigation costs are looking like out on the landscape in different fuel types and different communities. And then we're also interested in the total value of the homes treated. So what costs are being projected. So now we're into tab 4, which is the tables tab. This can be a little overwhelming if you haven't filled this out before. There are a lot of fields, but just kind of pace yourself. If you have any questions about what we're looking for, you're welcome to contact CFSC. We can look at the numbers you've entered, make sure they make sense in terms of assessing your project or representing your project. So you'll complete the work plan for your project. This should demonstrate enough planning and consideration of the project from start to finish that we can see what it is you're going to be doing clearly. Should be consistent with your budget and obviously with your project description in the narrative portion. Be sure to point out in the work plan where you're working with collaborators and key partners too. So the tables tab also contains the deliverables tables. There are 3 basic categories that we track in terms of deliverables for this grant program. There are the community assessment, planning type activities, information and education programs, and then the fuels treatment deliverables. As you're entering this information about your project, you might have deliverables in all 3 categories. You might just be focused on fuels treatment. It's not necessarily better or worse to be, more broadly focused or more acutely focused. It just all depends upon what your project is looking to accomplish and what's the best fit for your area. So if you don't have, planning deliverables in your grant, that's fine. For the planning and the education deliverables, a lot of times you'll just be entering one in the table. If you have, for example, you're producing one plan or one poster, and maybe you're printing 200 copies of that poster, that's still just one item that you would report as a deliverable. And that one looks really small, but that's totally fine. That's how we want you to represent it. With the acres, it's a little more complicated because you might be splitting acres between match and federal funds. So you got to think a little bit more about how acres of treatment are being allocated, and you can reach out to us if you need guidance for that. The categories that you'll be covering under the fuel treatment section include prep for treatment. So any kind of mapping, flagging, surveying, maybe getting right of entry agreements from landowners. Those are the type of deliverables you would report as acres prepped for treatment. And then obviously mechanical treatment, the different treatment types. There's more detailed lists within the deliverables table, so you'll be entering acres of treatments based on type. Those acres can overlap, so you might have a total project footprint of 50 acres, and you might do 50 acres of thinning and 50 acres of chipping. So it's going to total 100 acres of various treatments, and that's how those acres get represented. I should note, you will see prescribed fire as a treatment type in the deliverables. We are emphasizing that we don't want to fund, or we're not going to be funding prescribed fire activities under this particular program. So here's a very small screenshot of what you'll see in the deliverables table. Mostly just want to get everyone comfortable with what this looks like. There are a lot of fields here, and so want everyone to be comfortable with going in there, entering data. So for match versus federal deliverables, you're going to be splitting numbers based on the percentage of cost. If you have an item that's just one item, like one plan, you can enter one in each field for match and federal, and we'll know what that means. But if you have multiple acres that you're treating, and let's say 80% of it is paid for with the grant and 20% is paid for with match, you would split that acreage based on the cost share. So you'd have 80 acres in the federal column and 20 acres in the match, or correspond with however many acres you're actually treating. And then the third item under the tables tab is the application budget. Our application does not have a budget narrative, so it's important to be very clear in your application budget exactly what is being funded, what rates are being used. When in doubt, break it out as much as you can. Try not to lump things together, so that we can really see how your budget items have been thought through and match up with the activities that you're planning. There's a lot of detail in the application itself describing the individual budget categories, or if you're not sure how to categorize something, you can look at that. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward budget with categories there. If you have employees whose time you will be allocating to the grant, that goes under personnel. If you are working with contracted project managers, be sure those are represented in contractual. Equipment items are only those items that are greater than $5,000 in value. If you are proposing to purchase equipment, which you are allowed to do, you need to be sure and reach out to California Fire Safe Council ahead of time, and we'll have you do a cost-benefit analysis and proposal to describe the type of equipment you're looking to purchase. Things you might think of as equipment, like leaf blowers, chainsaws, sort of small equipment doesn't have a value of $5,000 per unit, is considered supplies. So let's see, we've covered everything here. The budget also has a match column that you will fill out. Again, just sorting your match into those same categories and representing the values of any in-kind match that you may have. Specific to direct costs, indirect costs in your budget, if you have a federally approved indirect cost rate, you can include that as a federal cost on your application. You'll need to upload your approved indirect cost rate agreement with documents in order to charge that rate. You also have the option of just charging the 10% de minimis rate, for which you don't need an approved negotiated indirect cost rate, and that would be 10% of your direct costs. In the grant guide, there is a example calculation and table showing how to calculate indirect cost based on modified total direct cost. It excludes, for federal grants, it excludes the equipment, it excludes contracted amounts above $25,000. So it's different than state grants. If you're used to state grants, your indirect will be calculated a little bit differently. And if you choose not to charge your full negotiated indirect cost rate, you're also allowed to use the difference as match on your project. So again, background about match contributions. They can be cash or in kind. You'll need to be able to document the value of the in-kind contributions if the award is funded. They can be from the applicant organization themselves or third parties. You just have to have letters of commitment from any partners that are involved, showing their match contribution and giving details about what it is, when it's occurring, what the value is, and who is sort of responsible for generating that match and reporting it. They need to be relevant to the project, so basically be part of the scope of the project. Verifiable with documentation. They cannot be from another federal award, and they cannot be used as match for another federal award. So basically double dipping with match is not allowed. The final question in the tables tab will relate to match. This is where you'll enter your matching contributions for the project and their value here. And you need to make sure that whatever match you have listed in this question is consistent with the letters of commitment that you provide in the Documents tab. So the Documents tab is the final tab that you'll complete. We've requested the documents that are needed to complete the risk assessment phase so that the initial awards can be made. These documents also help establish eligibility. Some of these apply specifically to nonprofits, but wouldn't apply to government agencies, that sort of thing. So if you have any questions about what's required or what applies specifically to you, feel free to reach out. One of the requested documents relates to fiscal sponsorship relationships. If you are an organization that doesn't have legal status and you're working with a fiscal sponsor to apply for funds, you'll need to have your fiscal sponsor agreement completed and uploaded along with your grant application. There is a template available on the Documents tab that you can download to use to create a fiscal sponsor agreement. And you would need to arrange with your fiscal sponsor, what the payment arrangement will be for managing grant funds. Fiscal sponsors cannot sub-grant funds to their sponsored organization. There has to be a reimbursement relationship, or the fiscal sponsor has to pay for costs directly. So that process needs to be defined in your fiscal sponsor agreement, as well as just roles, who's doing what in the project, who will be tracking documentation, who will be doing the reporting, and so forth, so that you have the capacity to complete the project if it's funded. And then the letters of commitment are also uploaded here in the Documents tab. They must be consistent with the application. They must be on organization letterhead and signed by someone who is authorized to represent the organization and commit the organization's resources. We'll need contact information relating to the match. The timing of the match needs to be within the projected project period. We need to understand the value of the match and how it relates to the scope of the grant. So there's a document upload window that appears in Zoom Grants when you upload documents. It looks like this. There is a option to use a link versus an actual upload. So you want to make sure you're actually uploading the document. Links can disappear. And we want to make sure that our reviewers have access to the documents consistently so that your application remains complete. There is a 4 megabyte upload limit. So if you're having trouble getting files to upload or to stay uploaded, you may want to make sure that the resolution is appropriately sized. If you're using a scanner, they're usually in the settings. You can scan something at low resolution. And if you need any help with that, feel free to reach out. Once you've gone through your application, Zoom Grants runs an error check. They are basically making sure you've answered each question completely. It won't necessarily find things that are incorrect, but it will find things that are incomplete. So once you hit submit, things may pop up in the error check that you need to go back and fill in. With Zoom Grants, often you can get kind of stuck or not see your most recent information that you've entered. So you'll want to refresh the page to see that. Sometimes just refreshing the page kind of gets things back on track. Same with when you do the document upload, you won't see your documents on the document tab until you hit refresh. So I'm just going to take a peek in the chat because I saw someone writing things. So for those of you who have questions and have entered questions in the chat, I'm going to request that you follow up with an email to me. My email is in the chat, and we'll have it again at the end of the presentation. And we will be sending out a follow-up email with the slides that were provided today and links to the other resources. All right, so once you go through the application submittal process, you'll have a Submit Now button available. This is what the final submission steps look like, and you'll enter your initials and verify that you're ready to submit your application. With this application, you do get a confirmation page, so you should see that. Make sure that you see that. If you don't, if it gets stuck and just says saving, or the power goes out, or there are a lot of different things that can happen. So make sure that you see this submission page that's verified that it's submitted. Don't assume that it is until you see this. So once your application is submitted, it will be listed under the submitted tab. So it will not be in the incomplete tab anymore. So don't panic, it's still there. I've done this myself. I've had it disappear from the incomplete tab and wondered where it was for a second. You can still edit the application in Zoom Grants up until the deadline. So if you're, if it's getting close to the deadline and you're nervous about getting it completed, I recommend that you go ahead, get it answered enough to the point where you can get through the error check, and then go ahead and submit it. And then you can work on it. Rest assured that when the deadline hits, it will be submitted for you. You can also print and save your application as PDF from the home page. So you're able to retain a copy of it to refer back to if you need to. So here are a few recommendations for how to submit successfully. I've seen a lot of grant applications over the years, and I found that there are a few things that are particularly helpful. Starting with what takes the longest is a big one. Getting those letters of commitment, getting your match defined, figuring out your budget, researching costs, things like that, where you're relying for information from other people coming in. Save the stuff that you can write at the last minute if you need to, and work on those longer tasks first. Using the application guide is helpful. Give it a read through. It may answer a lot of initial questions that you have, and hopefully make you a little bit more comfortable. There's a lot of information, again, with federal grants, and reaching out to CFSC can help if you need clarification on anything too. Obviously, pace yourself. Make sure everyone involved in the project, including your project manager, understands what is planned. If you have time, asking someone who's not familiar with your project at all to read your application is very helpful. I do this when I write grant applications. They're going to catch things that maybe you haven't explained well enough at first. Maybe there's an acronym or there's a place that you're referring to that someone may or may not be familiar with. There may be a lot of jargon related to treatment types or fuel reduction concepts that someone reading may or may not understand, and it's good to help clarify those things. The people that review our grants have a background in fire mitigation and forestry, so they're going to understand most of the concepts that you're talking about, hopefully. But if there's like a local acronym and they're not from your area, things like that can be good to catch if you have someone available to read your application. And the smoother your application reads, the easier it's going to be for the reviewers to understand it. Again, you can reach out. Oops. Skipping ahead here. Again, you can reach out to CFSC. Please reach out as early as possible. We do get a lot of last minute questions. We do get a lot of people. Most people submit their applications that, 1 day or 2 days before the deadline. They wait till the last minute. So the earlier you can reach out with questions, the easier it is for us to respond and give you more detail. So just a little bit about the next steps. Once the applications are submitted, they go through initial screening, just for completeness, for matching the program requirements, making sure they're eligible, and making sure that they are sort of consistent with themselves. We may reach out to you if there's something specific. Let's say the indirect cost rate isn't calculated quite right or something like that. But overall, the things we're checking for at this point, we try not to disqualify any applications, but we've had folks who just flat out forgot to submit a budget because they forgot that extra tab was there. So just a heads up that you want to make sure that you track your application process and don't miss any steps. And again, as we move forward, there'll be a risk assessment of your organization, something to think about going down the road. If you are funded, if you pass the initial screening, we will be reaching out to talk to you about organization capacity and make sure that you are prepared to implement a grant-funded project. Again, here's a reminder of the timeline. The grant application period is currently open and will be closing March 15th. And it's Pacific Daylight Time. I think we switch on the 10th, so just again, make sure that you're ready to meet that deadline or plan to submit your completed grant application before the deadline. So the application resources that you're going to want to find, if you haven't already, they are on the California Fire Safe Council website. We have the application guide, which is basically just the big book that describes the program and questions about the application process. We have what's called the planning tool, which is an optional document that's basically a printed version or electronic version, offline version of the application questions. So if you're working with multiple people, maybe you don't want everybody signing into the application, you can send that out, have them fill out their sections. You can use it that way, or it's just a sort of planning or scheduling tool for completing your application. Again, that's optional. And then the Zoom Grants portal is there under the Grants and Programs tab. You can go to apply for a grant, and you can access the Zoom Grants portal and start a new application right there under that link. A few additional resources the CFSC provides on our website that I just want to share. Encourage you to browse around and take a look at what's on there. We have the Virtual Learning Center, which has resources and toolkits for a variety of wildfire mitigation type activities. We have the events calendar, which includes California Fire Safe Council events and events from our other programs like the County Coordinators Program. You can propose events for the calendar if you reach out to us, and we can get those on there if you have a community event that you want to promote. We also have the mitigation messenger that we send out, which is quarterly with success stories and other resources. If you want to receive that and our email blasts, you can sign up on the website to receive those. And we also send out information about grant applications and reminders and training activities and all that good stuff. We also have social media presence. This QR code takes you to our link tree, which links you to all of our different social media sites. So you can access that here. And that covers the application process and resources for the 23-24 SFC grant program. We'll share a follow-up survey and contact information after the meeting via email, so you can look at that. Again, if you have any questions about the program, you can reach out to me. My email is right there, lgalliano@cafiresafecouncil.org. It's also available in the grant guide if you need to reach out. I want to thank everyone for your interest in this program and for your commitment to wildfire mitigation. I will stay on for a bit and make sure I grab questions out of the chat because I don't want to miss anybody. But aside from that, I hope that you have a good experience writing your applications, and reach out if you have any questions, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.